Hi, everybody. My name is Bill. I am an alcoholic and an addict. Good morning. Vinny, thank you for asking me to come and share on this step today. What I'd like to do is just start off by letting you guys know what my life was like before I got to Alcoholics Anonymous and actually participated in my own recovery. I had no reasons to blame my parents for anything that happened in my life. I was brought up in a very supportive household. No drugs, no alcohol in that household. And, very encouraging and supportive parents. I was brought up with morals and principles in my life. And I carried a lot of those morals and principles into active addiction and alcoholism. I have no idea how I did that. The only explanation I have for that is God. I lived my adult life, 28 years of it, in active addiction and alcoholism. This disease had a very slow progression in my life. It took 28 years before my ego was actually crushed enough for me to realize that I had no control over what was happening in my life anymore. My father, he did the best he could with me, and he said to me, son, you need to rely and trust in yourself and what's in your back pocket. He taught me to be self-reliant, self-sufficient. Normally these aren't bad things to be brought up with in your life, but when you're an alcoholic and a drug addict of the type I am, and you're full of fear, and you're full of yourself, it's a pretty dangerous cocktail for me. I thought that material success in life was success. I judged my life and other people's lives by what car they drove, what house they lived in, how much money they made. So these were the things that I carried into active addiction and alcoholism. I wanted everyone to see me as a successful person, and that, here I am, a prominent businessman of good earning potential, right? Yeah, that was me, I thought. For me, I found out the hard way that the material world was not for me, and I didn't belong in it. And if it was to come, it was to come through God's will, not mine. And I had to learn a lot of hard lessons in life before I actually got to that point. I can tell you that, my disease was such a slow progression that I managed quite well material-wise. I was quite successful in business, but I was unsuccessful in relationships in my life, with how I treated people, and with the freedom. And I'm talking about the freedom from my own twisted thoughts. I had none. So what brought me here was a huge amount of financial and moral wreckage. At the end of my use and abuse of drugs and alcohol, I ended up on the second floor of one of my apartment buildings, and I was 131 pounds, and I couldn't put down a bottle of whiskey or the other drugs I was taking at that time, not for 5 minutes. So that's my unmanageability, That's what it progressed into for me. The great I am that I can handle this. I used to tell my sister, she's 21 years in this program at the time, and I'd say, listen, I got this. I got this. Look around you. Look what I have in my life. She said, yeah, exactly. You lost 2 houses. You lost your business. You're black and blue. You haven't showered in a week, and you're 131 pounds. Should I go on? And I said, listen, I'm not going into a detox, because if I go into a detox, I'll lose everything. She said to me, you already lost it all, Bill. The only thing left for you is jails, institutions, or death. And I'm like, yeah, right. Keep spouting off with your AA little things there, Janice. So I asked her to leave, and she did. And that was to be the last time that my sister would try to intervene in my recovery, because she knew that I was way beyond any human aid. That was at that time. The last night of my use and abuse of drugs and alcohol, I I'm a lung cancer patient survivor. I had my left lung removed in '08, and I was doing a lot of bad things, inhaling a lot of bad things, drinking tons of liquids, and taking enormous amounts of opiates. And I couldn't breathe one night, you know. So I'm like, oh my God, I says, oh God, please help me, you know. I always go to God when the things are the worst, right? But one thing I left out that time was I'll never do it again. I didn't say that, I just asked for help. And I felt humbled at that point because I actually felt like I didn't have anything under control anymore. And I think that was one big block and barrier that I had to get out of the way in order for God to come in just a little, you know. So, you know, like a good addict and alcoholic, I run off down the stairs, come back to the beautiful city of Worcester here to cop some more drugs. And on my way, I get, you know, my truck runs out of gas on the 495 overpass. So it's a diesel, so I'm trying to start it because I'm freaking out, and it becomes vapor locked, and I go get diesel, it won't start. So I pass out behind the wheel. And I get woken up by a Marlboro police officer, and I'm arrested on an open case, my bail's revoked, and up to the Cambridge Hilton I go. And I'm in jail for 3 months. So be careful what you ask God for, you just might get it in a way you don't plan on. Because I did. I actually ended up, I asked God for help, and 20 minutes later I got it through a Marlboro police officer. That's how he chose to work. They chose to work through that person. And I ended up in a jail cell. And I detoxed off of multiple drugs and alcohol. And, you know, but I can say that I felt the presence of God in that cell that night. And I did. Because as sick as I was physically from the detoxing, there was this weird calm in that cell. And I didn't know what it was at the time, because I was still way too blocked off, but I knew something was with me, you know, and I kind of refused to believe it was God, because look, he got me into this mess, right? I'm saying to myself. So anyhow, you know, that's the biggest part of my mess, you know. Through two trips up to Cambridge, I actually became willing to do something about my problem. And the first step for me was admitting that I had one. And the second part of that was admitting that I couldn't do anything about it and I was powerless. And that was a huge deal for me because, as I said, I had an ego that would fill this room because I thought I was successful material-wise. Hey, look at me, you know. And I wouldn't accept help or trust in anyone but myself. Don't forget, I was brought up that way, so that's how I lived. You know, what brought me here was the moral wreckage, the financial wreckage, and the feelings, you know, and the fears, and just plain being scared, you know. When I got out of Cambridge, I was petrified. I was like a deer in the headlights. I had forgotten how to live my life. Now I'm abstinent from drugs and alcohol, right? So I've put down what I used to treat my fears, doubts, and insecurities. So now I'm left with me, right? And I get out and I'm like, oh my God, I'm afraid of people. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't know what to say. I feel weird. I'm like all over the place, you know? You know, I think about this today, and it's a good remember when for me, because those feelings are absolutely horrible. You know, and then this voice comes into my head, and I'm talking to myself, I'm saying, you forgot how to live? You know, I spent so many years living that way that I became totally maladjusted to life. I had no idea how to live life. I didn't know how to be a son. I didn't know how to have a relationship. I didn't know how to be a brother, you know, a nephew, anybody. I was just totally out there. So, you know, I latched on to my sister, God bless her, and her husband. He's got 42 years this year. And they started, you know, I took the suggestions early on around here, you know. I went to meetings every day. I asked God for help, even though I didn't believe I would get it. I still asked him for help. I reached out to other people. I joined a group, and I got a sponsor. So let me tell you a little story about my sponsor. So I'm a building contractor, okay? So 18 years before I was to get out of jail, I was doing a job out in Marlboro, and this is how God works. And my customer says to me, Bill, I have an electrician. And I'm like, I normally don't let people do that because I'm a general contractor and I need to orchestrate the job. I said, all right, go ahead, use your guy. So I come into work that day and all the framing's done in the basement, and I see this guy running around downstairs, running his Y, he's all happy, and I'm like, oh, Marlon, this guy's too happy for me, And he comes running up to me and he's like, hey, how you doing? My name's Chris. And he's shaking my hand. I'm like, I'm good, Chris. I says, how you making out down here? I'm doing good. I've been here for 2 hours. I'm like, yeah, I bet you have. So he's running around and he's getting it done, And lunchtime rolls around and it's around 11:45 and he walks up to me and he says, hey, hey, Bill, you want to go to an AA meeting? I look at the guy, I go, what? I go, what are you talking about? I go, you go to those things? He goes, yeah. I go, well, I don't have your problem. So he looks right at me and he goes, I'm going to save you a seat. I'm like, yeah, you do that. I said, just get your inspection and get the hell out of here. I don't want my customer hearing that. Little did I know the customer was in the program too, right? So I'm the only one with the apple I can't see, right? So, 18 years goes by, and I go through all these trials and tribulations. I get out of jail, and I'm going to meetings. My brother-in-law brings me to this meeting in Southborough, and he picks up this other guy, and my brother-in-law comes up to me, like right at the end of the meeting. Now, I'm shaky. I'm 3 weeks out. I don't want to talk to anybody. I mean it. I didn't want to be there. Couldn't figure out what the hell you people were smiling about. Didn't want anything to do with it. And my brother-in-law kept saying, willingness. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, okay, Jerry. So he says to me, Bill, I can't take you home. I'm going to bring Bobby. And I didn't understand what the hell he's talking about. He goes, but this guy will give you a lift. I look over, and the guy's looking at me, smiling. I'm like, oh, Jesus, I got to talk to this guy now? I go, all right, willingness. I go, it's only a 15-minute drive, right? So I follow the guy outside, and he opens the passenger door, opens it physically, goes around, sits in the truck, and I look in at this guy, and he goes, told you I'd save you a seat. I almost puked on the guy. And when I tell that, I still get goosebumps because, I really believe that is God working through other people. Call it what you want. That was one of my vital spiritual experiences. And the first question I asked this guy is, how do you do that? You're still the same way you were. Why do you live that way? Because here I am. I'm restless, irritable, and discontented. I'm aggravated. I'm pissed. I don't want to be there. I don't know how to talk to people. I want what this guy has, right? So there's the attraction for me. And he said to me, look, he said, I can tell you, and then I asked him, what do you want? Because I used to take a couple oxys and a hit off a whiskey bottle to feel like that. Well, I did. And he said, I can tell you, he goes, I assure you, I'm on no drugs, no alcohol. He said, I simply have a relationship with my Creator that I trust. And I'm like, what? I mean, that's not what I want to hear. I want to hear you just popped a pill and you're all better and it's legal. It's a legal drug and you get it from a doctor, right? So anyway, I asked this guy to sponsor me because I simply wanted what he had. And what he said to me was, Bill, he said, have you had enough? And I said, I believe so. He said, are you willing to do anything it takes? And I kind of looked at him. He's like, oh, I'm serious. And I said, yes, I am. Even though I really didn't believe I was, I said it. And I said, he said, do you believe in God? And I said, yeah, I believe in God. He said, you may, but you don't have a relationship with him. He said, and I can show you how to do that. And the only way I sponsor men is through the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, that is the program of recovery. And he kept drilling that into my head. And I'm like, oh, if he says it one more time. And he said, I can guarantee you will realize what a life second to none is. And I could not imagine that. Could not imagine. So I said, let's do this. And I jumped in both feet. I did. And my sponsor told me, you're responsible for your own recovery. He said, I'm going to tell you this. You want to go to a meeting with me every day? You call me by 10 a.m. or you're not going in my truck. He goes, this is for people who want it, not need it. And I'm like, oh, this guy. He made my resentment list, which is our step today, many times. He made it 18 years prior. So, I decided to embark on this with him, and it was the best thing I've ever done for myself. Freedom from the bondage of self. Never knew what that meant. Freedom from my own twisted thoughts, fears, doubts, and insecurities. There's a person that I love very much that has gone through this process and sponsors many women. And she says, take away the blocks and barriers. You're blocked off from the sunlight of the Spirit, as this step talks about, right? And she's a very wise woman, and she's helped me so much, more than she'll ever know. So what I ended up doing was my sponsor told me, listen, I'm going to give you a big book and a highlighter and a pen. Here's your first set of instructions. He goes, start from the cover. What's on the first 2 pages is what you know. I open them up and they're blank. I'm like, what a wise guy. Wise guy. But he's right. He's right. He said, leave your pride and your ego at the door. It has no place in recovery. Which I didn't like too much either, but he was right. See, this guy liked to tell me the truth, and I didn't want to hear the truth. But I was willing. I had that much willingness, only because I was in a lot of pain. So I did that. I read the first 63 and a half pages, and then we sat together time after time. I mean, he dissected sentence by sentence through the first 63 and a half pages. At times, I was just like, oh, come on, But I needed to have a clear-cut understanding of my illness, and that's what did it for me, After we did that, on August 12th, 2012, we sat at my kitchen table, and I did a formal third step with him, which was weird, holding hands with a guy at my kitchen table, I got to tell you. That was weird. But, we held hands, and we said the third step prayer. We invited God in, and I made a covenant with God that day that I would complete this process and that I would carry this message to people who still suffer. And I take that seriously. I don't go back on covenants with God. And so then he says, okay, now we launch out on a vigorous course of action. And I said, okay, I'll start it tomorrow. He goes, oh, really? He said to me, no, you'll start now. And he takes out a 5-subject notebook, and he hands me a pen. He says, I want you to say the third step prayer and invite God in, and you're going to start your resentment list. And I said, what's that? He goes, you're going to list out names of people that you're upset with or you're angry with or that you feel have wronged you. He says, this is the beginning of your 4th step, Bill. I said, why? He said, because you have no idea. He says, you have no idea how much anger will block you off from God's Spirit. He said, so you need to list everyone. When I thought I was done with that list, he told me to take another hour with God, and I did that. And more names came. So and then he tells me to list my principles and my institutions. I said, why? He said, because out of those institutions, there's people in those institutions that you resent. Am I right? And I had a million of them. Not a million, but I had a lot of people, from the jails, the courts, and all that stuff. And the principals, I didn't have as many of those, but I had my fair share. And I wrote them, and I had all those written out. He reviewed them, and I was just about ready to leave for Martha's Vineyard, my first sober vacation with my sister and my brother-in-law. They offered to take me. So I'm psyched, right? I buy a beach chair, right? I get my readers, right? And I get like a whole thing of pens, and I stuff them in, and I got a beach chair with a little thing in the back I can put my writing in. I said, I'm sitting on the beach with God, and I'm going to start banging these people up on causes and effects. I couldn't wait to get to the causes and effects. And he said, listen, keep it to 15 words or less. I don't want any stories. And I'm like, so I did. I get to Martha's Vineyard, And he lays it out with me, he says, okay, now he says, listen, you got to put the 3 columns on the left page, Bill. The left page. And he draws me an example. He says, this is what you do. I says, okay. He says, then you take and flip the page. Don't touch the right page. Okay, you got that? I got it. All right. So I go down there. He calls me and he goes, the only stupid question is the one you don't ask me. I'm like, yeah, right. So I go down there and I get on the beach with God. I'm there for 8 days. Man, I got 286 resentments banged up. Boom! I'm like, this guy is going to be psyched when I get back. So I get back and I'm like, Jerry, get me home. I'm calling him. I'm an hour from the house. I'll be there in an hour. Come get me. He's like, relax, I'll come get you. So he comes and gets me, and we go to this parking lot over in Marlboro, and we're sitting there, and I says, here. And he grabs the book, and he flips it open, and he's reading. And he looks at me, and he goes, this is solid work. He goes, the writing looks really good, Bill. And he looks at me, and he goes, but you don't know how to follow directions. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, Bill, I told you, the left page, the 9 columns, this way, left page. You got them all on the right page. He goes, you can't, he goes, how are you going to turn this around? He goes, the column's going to transfer. I'm like, oh, no. So at first I got really pissed off because he told me to write the whole thing over again. Because here I am thinking, yeah, I got it done, but God has a funny way of working in my life, and I will tell you that I got probably another 45 resentments out of it because I rewrote everything all over again, and that's the truth, As I rewrote the entire 4th step up to that point, and I went through that, and more names did come, and more resentments were put down. So that was God's way of making sure I was thorough, I guess. When we got to the turnaround part of things, there were some that I really had a hard time with, The turnarounds were tough for me on a lot of them because I didn't feel I did anything wrong. But he worked with me on that stuff, and we went through every single one of them in close detail. And he pointed out to me where I was self-seeking, what I did when I didn't get what I wanted, where I was fearful, where was I dishonest. It was tough to go through those, but it was important for me to take the other person out of the equation, take myself out of the other person out of the equation, and look at the resentment for what it is, and take responsibility, because then I can be free. And I got to tell you that the turnaround part of it was where I started to feel the freedom, because it wasn't occupying space in my head anymore, That was the big thing for me, I didn't realize how much space this stuff took in my head. And, the last thing he told me as we got halfway through my writing, he said to me, Bill, look, I'm seeing a shift in your writing here. He said, and I can tell you that if you don't put down, he goes, are there things in your mind that you say you're going to take to the grave with you that no one will ever know? And I said, yeah. He says, he goes, okay, those need to go in here. He said, I see you going back to what I call fluff and buff. He said, you're not, you're going from serious, now you're just writing about people flipping you off. He said, you need to put down the stuff in here that you want to take to the grave. He said, because that's what's going to truly set you free. And I can tell you that he was right. I put the stuff down. He's reading through it, and I'm like, and I'm waiting for him to go, oh my God, you did that? And he just reads right by, and I'm like, look at that. Aren't you going to comment? He goes, oh, that happened to me too. He says, what do you he says, that happened to me too. So, this whole journey for me has been about freedom. And I get many different forms of freedom from this work. And most of all, I get freedom from my own thoughts. And I can tell you that it's the best thing that I've ever done with my life. I've never been happier for no particular reason. It doesn't take money. It doesn't take anything like that, any material items to make me happy. And now that I've discovered a solution to all my problems through my relationship with God that I got through this book and these steps, I carry it to the next guy that suffers out there. And I take that seriously. That is the first order of business in my life. You know, my God and helping his other children that suffer. And because I live that way, I get to live in contented sobriety. It's unbelievable. And, you know, if I don't do these things in my life, I will lose everything else in it. And I know that. And that's enough out of me. Thank you.